So the last photograph that my first digital camera ever took was of my travel buddy Matt holding on to the canopy of our boat, trying to stop it from tearing off in the wind as this huge storm swamped our boat in the South China Sea. I'd met Matt a couple days before as part of a scuba diving trip in a town called Coron, which is in the province of Palawan in the Philippines, the far west end of the Philippines. It's a beautiful place. And Matt and I and about 10 other people had met, and we decided that the next part of this trip together was going to be to go to a place called El Nido. Now, El Nido had a reputation as being one of the most beautiful places in the Philippines, which would have made it one of the most beautiful places in the planet, because the Philippines is just full of stunning environments. And we decided that it was a really good idea to go in the rainy season, in this part of the country where the rainy season is most pronounced during the rainiest time of year of the rainy season. And it was about an 8-hour boat ride, and our boat was this vessel called a banca, which is similar boats you'd probably see lots of in different parts of Southeast Asia. It looks like a canoe, and it has this canopy over top that's there to protect you from the sun or from the rain, a little bit of rain. And it also has these two bamboo wings on it that kind of act as stabilizers, so that if you're going to get tipped in the waves, you're not going to roll over. Which is actually, they're often kind of thatched together, but they're pretty sturdy, and I've taken lots of trips on them before. I didn't feel any need to be overly concerned. And we'd had about 4 days of perfect sun and shine during the scuba diving trip. So the 10 of us get on this boat, and in about 90 minutes, this seriously huge storm starts up. It was kind of immediate. I would like to say that it kind of eased its way on, but it was instantly a massive storm. It had that kind of horizontal rain that just comes at you completely sideways, so the canopy that was supposed to be protecting us wasn't doing anything anyway. And then the wind got really strong, and the fabric that was actually holding the canopy together started to rip, and it started to tear off. And so this is at this point that my friend Matt stood up and tried to grab it in this very British comedic moment of expressing humor and futility at trying to control something that was completely out of our hands. So I took out my camera and I snapped the photo, and then I put it back in my pocket thinking, it's a little wet out here, maybe I don't want to get this camera damaged. At that point, the storm really picked up, and the waves actually started to get bigger than the boat itself. And so we were being tossed around like a cork in a bathtub, just getting thrown everywhere. And the crew, which hadn't been particularly communicative through this whole thing, continued to be not communicative, but decided to take the canopy right off. I guess they thought the flapping of the torn fabric was distressing the passengers. Which it was. So they unrolled it and pulled it back, and so we were suddenly exposed to the rain from the air, the rain from the ocean, and we would go up these huge waves, and then we would come down, and our boat would actually dive for a second, and the water would go first to our ankles, and then to our shins, and then to our knees. It was warm, so it was kind of nice, but still not ideal part of the journey. So we're sitting there, and we go up one massive wave and come down, and we hear a really loud snap. And I look to the side, and one of those two stabilizing wings is actually split. And the life jackets that were tied to it went into the ocean, and it drifted off in one of the waves. So that was worrying. And then we went up another huge wave and came down, and there was a crack from the front of the boat, which is also not a good sound. And one of the boys who was part of the crew ran to the front of the boat, and he kind of gave it a bear hug, and he was like riding a bucking bronco as we were flying over these waves, and he was trying to look over the front to see what had made that sound. And he looked at us, came back up, and it was the first time that any of the crew or anybody really had an actual genuine look of fear. At that point I thought, maybe I'm just imposing my Western views of travel on this experience. I'm overreacting, this is fine. This kid was freaked out, so that was a problem. And I realized in that moment that you don't really know how you're going to react in a crisis until you're actually in one. I looked across the boat at some of my fellow passengers, and there was a couple there, and the woman was screaming at her partner and crying, and he was screaming at the crew, who were then resorting to being non-communicative again, so that wasn't helping. And then beside them, there was this British couple who were joking and telling us all that, lots of people pay good money for an experience like this, so let's enjoy it. And there was a Spanish couple to my right who were somehow, despite all the water that was around us, managed to keep 2 cigarettes lit all the time. They didn't say much, but they could smoke a lot. And I decided I didn't want to scream or yell or laugh or smoke. So I just looked forward. It seemed like the only reasonable thing to do. I just decided I would look forward and face my fate. I knew there was nothing else I could really do that would help the situation, and I figured I might as well be ready for whatever happened next, even though the rain was so thick that I couldn't see the islands that I knew were around there somewhere. So I couldn't pick a waypoint to swim to in the inevitable event that this boat went under, which seemed like it was gonna happen. And I just kind of kept my eyes forward for about an hour and a half, and just held onto the back of the boat and tried to not go into the ocean. And I was still looking forward when the front of the boat touched onto a beach. That was not El Nido. It was a small island that I've since looked up on Google called Inapuan. And the storm was kind of chilling out by that point. And the captain, again deciding not to communicate, got off the boat, went to another boat, and left. It was too much to tell us where he was going or what he was doing. So he left us there, and but we weren't alone. There was a village of about 20 or 30 people, and they, there's a little community of about 10 or 12 bamboo huts on the beach, and pigs and dogs and chickens kind of running around in a bunch of little boats. And they were, I couldn't tell if this was like a rare sight or something that happens every week, but they just kind of came up to us and brought us in, and they went and they caught us a bunch of fish, and they cooked it for us right there on the beach. And we thanked them the only way we knew how, which was to take some soggy pesos out of our corners and buy every bottle of rum in their little store, and get us and all of them very drunk to celebrate our survival. And the sun went down at that point, and we knew suddenly that we were not actually going to be leaving this island that night. Captain was nowhere in sight, no one had said anything about it, but it was nighttime, and the storm was still going a little bit. So at that point, one of the people in the village grabbed a generator and an amp and a mic and a TV and fired up the karaoke machine, which is a staple in most Filipino communities. And so we proceeded to go back and forth. They were singing traditional Filipino songs that we didn't know, and they had the book. They had like the little book, and there was a handful of songs that I knew. And I think I sang "Nothing Else Matters" by Metallica, which I wish I could say it was like a deliberate, poignant decision, but it was really just all that I knew. And someone made a video on a cell phone, and it was this hilarious experience. And we slept in this room, in this kind of bamboo town hall that night. And we were all still wet and cold and shivering and getting gnarled by mosquitoes, but we were alive, which was something. So the next morning we woke up to the sound of this big horn, and we went out, and there was a huge banquet, huge, like 10 times the size of the one that we had come on. It was painted the same colors as the one that we had come on. So we knew our captain had come back with a massive boat. But the boat was too big. It was too big to actually get into the beach. So we had to get back on our crippled, busted boat, which was about 2 meters lower in the water than it had been when we left, and go back out into the waves. But it was actually to our advantage because the boats were going like this, and so when the small boat was at the same level as the big boat, we jumped from one to the other with all our wet gear and stuff. The next 7 hours were pretty uneventful. We just churned through the ocean. The waves were still massive, the storm was still strong, but this boat was actually designed for that kind of trip. And the Spanish couple kept smoking away the whole time. It was like the same trip for them. And so we finally get to El Nido, and all find our accommodations, and I started going through my stuff just to inspect the damage, and I find my camera in my pocket, my digital camera, and I try to turn it on, and it's not turning on. The salt water got into it and killed it. Even though I just kind of gotten away with my life, I was actually like really bummed. My camera, man, my camera. I need that. I need that to take pictures, and I'm in this place that's so beautiful. El Nido was everything that everybody had told it was going to be. These limestone cliffs that on all these islands that face this beautiful white beach, and it hadn't been ruined by tourism yet. It was 7 or 8 years ago, but at that time there was only 6 or 7 different beach houses there, so it was really quiet and beautiful. And I was really upset. I wanted to take some photos of the place, and I couldn't. So what I did was that night, finally, the storm went away. It seemed to only rain for the 2 days that we were actually traveling, and the sun came back out, and the ocean was this perfect, idyllic calm. So I rented my own personal banquet, just like basically a canoe, and I paddled my way out about 100 or 200 meters so I could look around a peninsula and look at the sunset. And in that moment, I realized that it did indeed suck that I didn't have my camera, but really maybe the purpose of that was more to learn that even in the worst and most unimaginable emergency, I could maintain a calm.